We are awaiting the sentencing of a man described by prosecutors from Robert Mueller's office to have operated at the heart of what the special counsel is investigating. That man, Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign chairman, awaiting a sentence that may very well result in him spending the rest of his life in prison. The last time we heard from special counsel Robert Mueller's team on Manafort, they described him as a bold and hardened criminal, likely to commit more crimes. But there's at least one man who doesn't see it that way.
Like Manafort has nothing to do with our campaign. But I feel I feel a little badly about it.
They raid his home at like 5 in the morning, I think on a weekend, and his wife is in bed and they go in with guns. Yeah. This isn't Al Capone.
I feel badly for both. I must tell you that Paul Manafort's a good man. He was with Ronald Reagan. He was with a lot of different people over the years, and I feel very sad about that.
He worked for Ronald Reagan. He worked for Bob Dole. He worked for John McCain, or his firm did. He worked for many other Republicans. He worked for me, for 49 days or something?
I feel very sad about that. It doesn't involve me, but I still feel, it's a very sad thing that happened.
Are you considering pardoning Paul Manafort?
I have great respect for what he's done in terms of what he's gone through.
Today, our friends at Axios describe this moment right now in the Russia probe this way. Even without seeing Robert Mueller's report, we have already witnessed the biggest political scandal in American history. And that is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. At the table, Mimi Rocah, former assistant U.S. attorney, Bloomberg executive editor for Bloomberg Opinion, Tim O'Brien's back. Heather McGhee, a distinguished senior fellow at the public advocacy group Demos, and former Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill joins us for the very first time at the table. We're so excited you're here.
It's great to be here, Nicole.
It's great to have you.
Let's have some fun.
I think fun will be had.
Yes.
And in Washington, if he's here, it's always fun. Former RNC chairman Michael Steele's back. All lucky for us MSNBC contributors. Mimi, let me start with you and what we should expect. What do we not know? We know that they view Manafort and his contacts with a Russian-aligned associate as being at the center of the special counsel's probe into Russian collusion. We know they view him as someone likely to commit crimes if he were not in prison. And we know that he is so far the one individual to have entered into a cooperation agreement and blown it up himself by lying while signed up as a cooperating witness.
Right. Look, I think there's a lot we don't know about Manafort, and hopefully we will find out, although I don't think we'll find it out today in this sentencing proceeding, because I think most of what we don't know sort of pertains to the other case, to the D.C. case. So I think what we don't know, though, and the reason we know there are all these known unknowns is because of all the redactions that are still out there. Every sentencing memo that the prosecutors have filed, every response to a motion, that was made that they were ordered to give responses to, every one of them has still had redacted material in it. Now, does that mean that it's classified and we may never see it? Possibly. Or it means that it goes to what is still this continuing investigation, and we may yet see the fruits of that. And remember, we haven't really seen the fruits yet of Flynn's cooperation. I don't think we've fully seen the fruits of Gates's cooperation. I mean, Flynn met with them 19 times, and we barely know the tip of what he knew. So I think there's a lot about Manafort. What was he doing with Kilimnik exactly? We really don't have all the pieces yet.
So I just heard that they have wheeled Paul Manafort into the courtroom in a green jumpsuit in a wheelchair. It's been reported in the past that he suffers from gout. I'm not sure if that's the explanation for today's use of a wheelchair, but that trial now underway.
It's sort of like when they wheeled Hannibal Lecter in, on that gurney in Silence of the Lambs. I have very little sympathy for Paul Manafort at this point. I think among everyone in this drama, he's been, probably apart from the president, one of the people who seems to have this stone-cold lack of conscience. Every time prosecutors have given an opportunity to rehabilitate himself.
That's your parallel, right? Not the conduct.
Yes. Yeah, I won't go that far.
Remorseless.
Yes, remorseless.
Yes, okay. Making sure.
And he's never stepped up. Right. And he's been doing this for a very long time. So I have to believe the court is going to take that into consideration, and the prosecutors are going to ask for as much as they can get on him, which I think will be 24 or 25 years.
Michael Steele, if you can jump in in. I mean, there's so much that lifelong career Republicans knew about just how dirty Manafort's book of business was before he ever walked through the doors of Trump Tower and took the reins as campaign chairman. But I think what the new wrinkle or the new layer of information for those of us who already knew that was that he functioned during the Trump campaign, it would appear, as a consigliere for Russians. I mean, and the prosecutors have found him to have had divided loyalties between the Russians and the Americans. I mean, it seems to me that no punishment would be too severe for someone with divided loyalties.
Yeah, I think that's very right. And I think that's something that the judge has weighed and taken into consideration in regard to Manafort, particularly given the way he has behaved and the lack of remorse or the lack of regard he has for the process and what it means and why he's even in this position. Maybe that was the hubris of believing that at some point the president will pardon him. Maybe that's just the way he is. But it certainly has not served him well in trying to, stave off what will be the inevitable heavy hammer coming down on his head. For Republicans, going back and looking at this trail of tears, if you will, of Manafort's, resurgence in the Republican mainstream, that is an aberration. Paul Manafort was not a central player in any presidential campaign after the 76 election. He was not a central player in any of what Reagan was doing. They didn't need him on the convention floor. They didn't need him in the campaign. This was one of those moments, and then, there's talk, he could have gone anyway. He could have gone with the folks to help stop Trump, or he could go with Trump to help him win. But there was no battle over Paul Manafort among Republicans, certainly whether it's the consulting class or the political class, that they felt so desperate that he had to come in. They recognized his expertise in the last contested Republican convention, but this wasn't that. And I think that there were other operatives who were well positioned and better capable of doing what needed to be done. So there were other reasons why Manafort was brought to the table, and I think that's a lot of what's been redacted and what we hopefully will find out about.
It's such a good point, but it's a little nuanced. So let me draw you out on this, Michael Steele.
Sure.
No Republican, and there were 17 of them, not one of them thought to Google Paul Manafort and see if he was free. None of them needed him. Not Ben Carson, not Marco Rubio. No one had a question for whom the answer was, is Paul Manafort available this cycle? I worked on 3 presidential campaigns. His name came up only in the context that I mentioned, that, if we wanted to make an example of just how bad is dirty lobbying, it's so bad Paul Manafort's the only one that does it. How did he end up inside not just the inner circle, but running the Trump campaign?
Trump. That's how. I mean, look, you don't come into that orbit unless Trump wants you there. Corey could extend an invite, and I'm sure the children could extend an invite, but it's ultimately the president himself who has to see the benefit of having him there. And I think in many respects, given those associations and those ties outside of the campaign structure, the president put 1 and 2 together and said, hey, this guy's working with the Russians. He's got these relationships. I'm trying to do business with the Russians. This is a perfect fit. There's a reason why, you're handing off campaign information to the Russians, because the symbiosis between the two have become complete in many respects by Paul Manafort stepping into that space. Now, the question that some have had, Nicole, is, was that sort of a effort by Russians to kind of manipulate and maneuver and all of that? Way too scientific for me. The bottom line is that Donald Trump was looking out for Donald Trump, as he always does. And at that moment in that hour, Paul Manafort served more than one purpose. And it was not necessarily just getting elected president of the United States.
We have traveled so much distance from when those of us who covered the Trump campaign, and I remember watching Paul Manafort on the floor of the convention hall in Cleveland lie to George Stephanopoulos, I think, or Norah O'Donnell, and say, no, I've never done business with Russia. Meanwhile, over his shoulder, they're changing the Republican platform for the first time in history, Heather. Where are we now that the goalposts have so moved from, collusion has been established. It took place between Paul Manafort, who handed we don't know exactly what kind of polling data, but clearly more than the Quinnipiac top line, to a Russian-associated operative. we're not talking anymore about whether or not the Trump campaign chairman was in contact and coordination with the Russians. We're not talking about whether or not the platform changes clearly benefited Putin. They did. We're not talking anymore about whether a massive scam was played on the American people to lie about negotiations between Donald Trump's organization and Vladimir Putin's government to build Trump Tower Moscow. We're just talking about how far up that went. We don't know what the redactions say, but all we're waiting to find out is if we'll learn more about what's still being kept from the general public.
That's right. And I think we're waiting to find out whether or not the checks and balances that were created in this country are going to withstand what has absolutely, without a doubt, been the largest political scandal, has been the campaign with the most indictments. Do we even need to say that? I mean, the campaigns with the most indictments, guilty pleas, and convictions. This is going to be a test of whether or not Republicans and Democrats are able to say, you know what? We need to look in history. We need to have people look back in history and say that this was illegal activity and it was activity that couldn't stand in the White House. I think that's the only remaining question, is sort of who's going to have the backbone. Are any Republicans going to choose country over party? And where will we be able to be in a year from now when the Mueller report is out, when all of the things that we know, the redactions are out, it's all very clear. Is there going to be any accountability? Because, 70 million Americans have been arrested, right? We are a very criminalized American people. And to see people in the most powerful positions, people with so much money and influence and contacts, escape accountability, I think it's going to break something in this country.
So I saved the best for last, but I'm going to put you on the spot. What value is there in having this investigation have gone on for 2 years if Democrats don't decide this is a hill to die on? That I hate all the debate around impeachment. You don't impeach as a political calculation. You impeach if it's the only option for protecting the country from someone, as campaign chairman not working in the American interest. I mean, why is there hand wringing in the Democratic Party around this question of impeachment?
Well, because the last thing we want to do is give this guy anything close to martyrdom.
He's already got it. He stands up and says, "Oh, honey, is there wind?" I mean, he's already got it.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think if it's like, why are the Democrats being careful about his kids? I think there's a lot there, and there's no question that there is like kind of the concept of a bed of nails.
Yeah.
There's so many nails it doesn't feel painful to the Republican Party anymore, but you've got to really think about this. If we want judgment in our president, the judgment of this president in who he picked at moments of crisis to be the guy. And you know what they had in common, Manafort and Donald Trump? Money. His dirty book of business, Nicole, for Paul Manafort was all about making money. Mm-hmm. He could make more money if he was serving the underbelly. And Trump wanted to make more money. He saw the campaign as a way to make more money. The Moscow Tower was all about making more money. So the American people, I think, need to really think about that his judgment of, he can say all he wants that, he wasn't that big a deal. He picked him. He picked all these guys, and if you look,
and he knows exactly how many days he worked for him.
Yeah,
and that's it. There's only there 49 and a half days.
Somebody told him that number.
Whatever.
I think twice Sarah Sanders said, say 49 days over and over again. But if you look at Watergate and you look at this scandal and you want to say, yeah, there were more indictments in Watergate. Yeah. That's true. But the difference is this is a foreign adversary that had over 100 meetings. Are they going to move towards impeachment? I don't know if they will. But as this continues to evolve, I think the pressure will build. But I do think we do have to take in consideration the most important thing, and that is that Donald Trump doesn't remain president after 2020.
Do you believe that?
Hey, Nicole?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I say something real quick
Please.
on the impeachment piece? Because I think it's an important distinction to make at this juncture. I think the senator is exactly right in the way she's looking at this. And my calculation, looking at Nancy Pelosi and how she's playing this thing out right now, she's got the tools to impeach the president, but not the way we traditionally think. There doesn't need to be an impeachment show trial that's going to lead to a non-conviction in the United States Senate. She's already laying the predicate down with all these investigations that are going on. That's where the impeachment, quote unquote, of the president will come, when the facts are laid bare. People are finally forced in front of the cameras to testify before the American people for how they covered up, how they lied, how they stoked the flames of this administration. That's where this impeachment process, I think, has its greatest strength, not in hauling the president before some committee and reaming him out and having a vote for impeachment and then sending it to the Senate, but seeing a meticulous takedown by subject matter with an appropriate investigation by the appropriate authorities in the government and exposing it to the American people.
I respect the you-know-what out of both of you, but let me just push on this for one more minute. Do you think that if Republicans like, I don't know, Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows and those beauties, to borrow a Trumpian word, learned that President Barack Obama had run from the White House a hush money scheme and had written at least 6 checks for $35,000 a month to run an illegal hush money operation to keep some sort of sordid personal thing quiet? Do you think they would, have acted restrained and left him to go about his business out of fear of political repercussions?
Absolutely. They would have jumped all over that dog. They would have been there so fast and make your head swim. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't necessarily say that would have been the politically smart and correct thing to do. Because as we've seen, when you go down that road on impeachment, there are
Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. Why would they have proceeded? Would they have decided that there were? I guess my point is, they would have decided, I know what they would have decided, because I watch them and I study them and I subject myself to Fox News to try to understand them. They would have decided that there were enough questions about Barack Obama. It's where birtherism came from. They would have stoked these questions about his character, about where he was born and who he was actually working for, and they would have run that process like bulldogs. And my only point is not to say that Democrats should pursue impeachment, but we talk about how the public is numb and what's it going to take? What's it going to take for Democrats? He's an unindicted co-conspirator in a criminal campaign finance case in New York. The Southern District of New York has named him as an unindicted felon. He wrote the checks on days that he met with Angela Merkel and other people. My only point is, what are they waiting for? What is the trigger for Democrats?
Well, they're waiting to see what Mueller does. I mean, you can't make that leap without Mueller putting something on the table to leap into. And Mueller may not put everything you need on the table to make that leap. That's why what the speaker's looking at is other means in which you can triangulate on this question of impeachment in a way that you still get the relevant information and facts out there.
That's right.
I think we need to talk about this for a minute, because to your point, if this was a Democratic president, I mean, frankly, they would have impeached on the idea that Kanye West was in the Oval Office MFing on live TV.
We could find 10 points,
would have blown off their heads, right?
So we're ripping up. Let's lay this point out. If President Obama had met with an American adversary if he met with the Egyptians or the Iranians 5 times, if John Kerry had gone over there and done the nuclear deal and there were no notes, they would have impeached him.
I take your point. I accept it. They would have pushed, and maybe they would have gotten the votes in a Republican House to do it. But a Democratic Senate would have said, no, that's not right. That's not right. That's not happening. And that's what would happen here. So you would have the Lindsey Grahams of the world, who clearly is gone to a place I don't recognize, and my other Republican colleagues that are saying in private what we all wish they would say in public.
Right. But only Bob Corker said in public.
Right. And well, frankly, the ones that said it are gone.
Right.
So there's a lesson to be learned from that for the others that are there. So I think you would have this push and pull between the Senate and the House, and the American people would stay polarized. I'm not sure we would convince anyone.
That's right.
We need to convince people this is someone that doesn't belong on the world stage.
So pull public
representing
opinion.
Our country. Pull public opinion.
Yeah, that's
and
what's
then take
missing.
care of it in 2020.
There hasn't been a story yet that lays this out clearly for average Americans in a way that they can relate to about what's wrong. And they don't care about most of the minutia of the Russian scandal.
I don't think it's that they don't care. I think that it's
But
your
Mueller
point,
has to lay it out. There has to be a very clear narrative.
I can see your thought bubbles. Go.
No, a plurality of Americans think he should be impeached now. The Mueller investigation is what I do think people are waiting for, because there has just been, a storm of information, all of it more damning than the last. But what they're waiting for is for someone in Washington to say this was the line. Right. And, Mueller has become that character because no one else in Washington is willing to do it. And so they're just waiting for a sense of, okay, there's some adult that's going to actually say this is illegal and therefore the president should not be in office. And that's what I think the Democrats need to do. They need to be that grown up in the room that says, I don't care if politically this is not going anywhere. We want to have said to our children, we impeach this man.
But what happens if Mueller doesn't say that? Then what?
Right.
What's the next
Or
gap
if,
to be
or if he
filled?
just turns over the evidence. I mean, I think there's also a third
Right.
path that we don't look at where he doesn't tell them what to do. And
He just gives them everything.
Right.
He'll
He
give
just
them
says, here's what we found.
information.
I want your thoughts, and then I want to read you some extraordinary reporting in Axios that frames all of this up this morning.
I was just going to say, to your point, though, I mean, yes, everyone's waiting for Mueller, and we've talked about this before, how sort of dangerous that can be, because the hush money scheme in which he's been implicated as an unindicted co-conspirator, and which he did from the Oval Office, and which he's still lying about now, that has nothing to do with Mueller.
Correct.
So that's all there. I don't know if the Southern District will do more. I imagine that other people may be implicated and charged, but, you know, probably not Trump. So that's all ready for them. And that's just sort of getting, you know, forgotten.
By other people, Don Jr. signed one of those checks.
Well,
You think
exactly.
he's a
Other
fellow
people, yes,
Weisselberg?
Don Jr.
Yeah.
But and meanwhile, you've got Giuliani and Trump out there every day. The longer this drags out, giving misinformation about what the law is, what the facts are, and just confusing the record so people throw up their hands and say, we can't figure it out. Colin
It's
Trump.
all politics. It's all politics.
It's all public opinion. Let me put up Axios' frame on this because it's sort of what we're talking about. Biggest political scandal in American history. Scandal. Trump covered up business dealings with Russia. Historical parallel? None. Scandal. Flynn served as national security advisor while compromised by Russia, while being a threat of blackmail. Any parallels, guys? None. Scandal. Russian officials had more than 100 contacts with Trump associates during the campaign in transition. The Russians offered election assistance. The FBI and government authorities weren't alerted and in many instances were lied to about those contacts. Historical parallel? None. Michael Steele?
Right. Yeah, historical parallel. We've never been here before. And this is beyond the pale for what we would expect from any administration. There's no doubt about that. But I still think at the end of the day, you've just had the discussion about how this is being fed and read by the American people. There's more confusion than there is understanding. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that a hearing process can do, aside from impeachment, which becomes a highly contested political drama. You think Jim Jordan's going to show his behind? He showed his behind in the last hearing.
He's going to show his biceps. The man can't find a coat with his leg.
He's going to put on his wrestling tunic and do whatever.
I like a guy without a coat on. Of all my complaints, that isn't one of them.
So the idea of trying to bring the American people into this conversation in which Donald Trump, they can be inoculated to some extent from the noise that will come from this White House. But here's the other piece. Remember, they've already started laying down the tracks. So this idea of impeaching the president, and you do that, doesn't guarantee that Donald Trump will leave. It doesn't guarantee that he's going to go. He's going to have something to say about that. So I think the evidence is going to be important coming out of the special counsel, no doubt. We know what SDNY is doing right now. It's going to be, that's the sort of Damocles, if nothing else, over the president's head. But then this other piece, this impeachment piece, is a card you don't need to play, I don't think, right now.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.